How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tear Talk. Guys, today we're going to talk about the trifecta of manipulation. So basically, in order for manipulation to be successful, an inmate is going to target an individual. They're going to try to see if the environment allows it to happen. And they're also going to be very aware of the situation. There's three components to successful manipulation. Again, you have the individual, you have the environment. Will the environment allow it to happen? And then you have situations. Now, granted, I think for any game to be successful, all three have to work in the inmate's favor. And when I put situational in this, situational to me is one of the determining factors when it comes to manipulation, because situations can affect people, including those that are most confident. So when people say, well, manipulation, it won't work on me, well, that's because you really haven't been exposed to a situation where it could happen, where maybe you fall into some level of desperation. So I'm going to work with Joe today. Joe's our guest, and we're going to discuss this trifecta of manipulation. I don't think it's ever been discussed on this channel like this before, or at least a dedicated show towards it. So I think this will make for a good episode. And guys, don't forget, I got two good books out there on manipulation: Inmate Manipulation Decoded and Breaking Boundaries. They're both available on Amazon. If you haven't read them yet, I highly recommend that you do. All right, so hey, Joe, what's up, brother?
Hey, brother, what's happening?
Good. Joe, you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yes, sir. My name is Joe Pomponio. I am a retired lieutenant from the Texas Department of Corrections for 29 years. I've been working as an assistant jail administrator in our local sheriff's department in the jail division, and a panel member here for Tear Talk.
So Joe, obviously manipulation, it does happen in the prison setting. And then sometimes when I reviewing concerns that could relate to manipulation, whether it's out on, in another facility, even mine, or whatever it is nationally, I always ask myself, how could this happen? Now, the funny thing is, when I ask how could this happen, that doesn't always mean I'm looking solely at the individual. It also means I'm looking at the environment. What happened here? If this was a developed relationship, if the person that got caught up had no intent of ever falling in love with an inmate, and they did over the course of time, how did we allow that to happen? And then you got the situations that create it. And I think that's a great question to ask. How does it happen? But I want people to realize that question, when you ask it, it has an answer of accountability. And I want to mention something to you, Joe. If you watch the older videos that we've done, and by the way, we've grown in our perspective, when never absolutely really changing, but just growing in the perspective. When you see someone that gets manipulated and they've crossed the line, they fall in love with an inmate. Now we know there's a concern, because love is something that you do not want to have happen in the prison setting, because people will do crazy things for love. So our job is to make sure that doesn't happen. And that really is a support function, because you got to assume that we're all human. We all have flaws. And at any moment, we could fall victim. But having said that, there's checks and balances in play, including the support from the environment. And I know some people may say, well, it will never happen to me because I'm a strong individual. Yeah, but you can't control every situation that you'll ever face. And to me, that's why situational factors present a lot of pressure, because at any moment, a situation can change the whole dynamic. Now, when it comes to the environmental, I want to mention something. When inmates look for manipulation, they look at the environment. And even if they have a target that they feel is soft, they have to ask themselves, will the environment allow me to facilitate whatever game I want to play? So what are they looking at? They're looking at the culture of the facility. They're looking at complacency. They're looking at the relationship between that staff member and other staff members. I mean, that's a real big important play. Now, granted, if the game does occur and the person is successful, and the inmate is able to manipulate that staff member, a lot of us here on the other side of that would be like, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. It's disgusting. And whatever it is, and what they do is they immediately separate themselves from the person that got caught up. But the funny thing is, if you push that environmental factor in, that stops you from making that separation. Actually, that environmental factor makes you accountable. Yeah. And I think that, to me, is what we have to express more, where if you have relationships that have developed through time to where the person does catch feelings and the person does do something foolish that they shouldn't have done, then we have to go back and check every moment in which that was allowed to happen and what did we do at any effort to stop it. And that's why, Joe, I have a feeling a lot of people don't push the environmental part, because once you push that environmental part, you're also pushing accountability past the inmate and the manipulated staff member. You're also pushing accountability towards the facility at almost every level.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, there's a lot of things in the environmental that play the factor in, manipulation being successful. It's not always just on the person. Sometimes, unbeknownst to us, we tend to set that up and actually, put it in play. If you have an inmate that works around an officer for, 4 to 6 hours a day, maybe medical or education or, vocational, wherever. And we don't rotate these offenders out every so often, just so they don't get comfortable. That in itself is a recipe for manipulation, because they spend more time with the officer than the frontline supervision does. So, that allows them to learn the officer, learn the employee, over time. And I'm not just talking about security, I'm talking about departments too. We made it a habit where we would change our support inmates out every 6 months, change them around from job to job just so they didn't get comfortable. And one of the reasons for that was manipulation. We had a lot of females that worked in these positions, and we didn't want the inmate being comfortable enough to where they could start a manipulation tactic with the employee. So, unbeknownst to us, sometimes we kind of set the environment for it, not knowing that manipulation can happen.
And what's funny about that is, in this profession, I mean, obviously we have defined rules, policy, and procedures. So there is a level of self-governance, but we also have to kind of know that we're also dealing with humans. Yeah. And there's always going to be that need to connect. And that's where we have to also start to realize that even though the policies and procedures are in place, we still got to have our fail-safe. So yes, the policies and procedures in place to start holding that individual accountable. But then we also have to be aware that anything can happen at any moment. And therefore, now we have to hold ourselves accountable for holding each other accountable. And it's true, guys, because when even if you go to the situational, I have seen people who you would never think get caught up. And then the funny thing is, it's like, wow, I've never seen that happen because this officer was by the book, A, B, C, D, E. And it doesn't make sense. Yeah, it doesn't make sense if you look at the picture, a little bit broader. I get it, but maybe something happened in a moment, a situation that caused the person to shift or caused the person to weaken, or maybe they were desperate. You never know. Something on the outside that could have put pressure that unfortunately made its way to the inside. But that situation now changed the individual's perspective. And now, unfortunately, that now applies pressure, and now the inmate, being aware, because they are aware of whatever the situation is, will be able to maneuver their game based on the desperation of whatever this new situation is. And I give you an example. You got an officer that, let's say, is confident, does the job, someone that is truly by the book, and all of a sudden, let's say they go through a divorce, and you could see it. At one point, they were dressed up, look good, tight uniform, everything. And all of a sudden, next day they're coming to work. Uniform's not as good. Inmates start to see the sudden shift because, a couple of days ago, you're looking tight. Now you're looking like this. And their first thing is, wow, something must be going on at home because this person always came in tight. And next thing you know, there's an engage of dialogue. And even this person who usually didn't talk to inmates, now maybe they do because they just want to vent. They figure this is a safe way to vent, and they just vent. And next thing you know, they're vulnerable. The inmate acts on that vulnerability and like a what is it, a line or something, just aggressively pounces. And now they're able to take control of that situation. And when people look back and say, wow, I never expected it from that officer, it's like, to be honest with you, you really don't know, because at any moment, a situation can totally influence somebody. And if you're not aware of the pressure of situations and how much situations can affect you, then you're not ready to work in a correctional setting. Would you agree with that, Joe, or no?
Yeah, absolutely. In the situational process, one's ability to control their impulse is key. I used to call it the car salesman strategy. We all been to a car dealership, looking, for maybe getting a new car at some point, and we want to see what's out there. We go to the car dealership and we're looking, and the car salesman sees that we're looking, and from that point on, the manipulation's on. He's going to do whatever he can do to sell that car to you, and our impulse control plays a factor whether or not that, he's going to be successful. He could tell you, hey, guess what? Your payments will only be $50 more a month and you'll have this brand new car. Mm-hmm. I'll be damned if we're not driving this new car home because we listened to them. And in a correctional setting, it's the same way. These inmates are the car salesmen. They look for your vulnerability, they look for your weakness, and they look for your ability to not control your impulses. Yeah. You got to remember that these guys have 24 hours a day to think about their strategy, their plan, to learn about you. And, it's your job as an employee to remain professional, remain, situationally aware of manipulation and being able to control your impulses, even though you may be vulnerable at that time, given whatever, external stressors you have. So yeah, situational can play a big part of it.
Yeah. So if I was an inmate, let's say I'm observing. So someone had asked me on the channel, what do you look for first if you're an inmate, if you're looking to manipulate? I'm going to put something out in general before we go into specifically the trifecta. But I'm going to say I look for vulnerability. Now that means, well, vulnerability in what? Well, it depends on what pops up.
Yep.
I may not, let's say I have an individual and, well, I see she's a little hesitant, or I see she's looking for attention. Maybe there's a chance I can manipulate her. Now I'm going to look at the environment. Is there anybody there that's going to stop that? Is there anybody there that's going to prevent me from connecting to that individual? No. And then I look at the situation. Well, when is my most opportune time? Well, she runs the unit the full 8 hours. I don't see any supervisors coming down much. I don't see a lot of our support staff. So you know what? That could work. And, we'll go from there. Now, granted, I looked at the individual first. But there are some times where I could just be leaning back bored and say, man, these officers, man, they don't even do their job correctly. Man, they're so complacent. It's crazy how not effective they're being. I wonder what I can do now. So now I'm looking at the environment, knowing that if I wanted to target somebody, the environment would allow it. And now I can go to an officer, give it a shot. At this point, because at least I know the environment's not going to be an obstacle for me. Or I could just wait for the perfect situation to pop up. I could be sitting there watching staff interact, and all of a sudden I see two staff members arguing. Ooh, that's a situation. Two staff members I would never think about trying to manipulate. But look at these two. They're going at it. And they're partners. Oh, that's even great. Just yesterday, I wouldn't even think about these two because they were so by the book. But now these two don't get along. Oh my God. So now I got the situation going for me. And then there is a little bit of vulnerability here too, because those two individuals, maybe I can fuel the fire between both of them, keep them separated, keep them isolated. And next thing you know, the environment kind of plays out well enough, because if I keep them isolated, the two partners aren't talking to each other. They're not helping each other. They're not supporting each other. And the sad thing about this, guys, is when we don't communicate with each other, when we're not getting along, eventually what winds up happening besides the divide is we wind up sabotaging each other. And what I mean by sabotage is, let's say me and Joe aren't working well together. And let's say maybe I am starting to fall down a rabbit hole. Instead of Joe telling me, Joe's going to watch it happen. And to me, in our job, it is to help each other. So if you don't help me, it is sabotaging me. That's how much I feel our job is to protect each other. So, but with that said, look at that, guys. It doesn't mean that, it's always the individual, because if it was always the individual, then there would be people that would never get caught up. I would never be shocked If it was always the individual, if the individual was the one that we always looked at first, then it wouldn't shock me at all. This person won't make it, this person will. Very easy. But we know that's not the only determinant factor. I believe the strongest factor is the situation, because the situation changes the dynamic, which means that you could have a person that you idolized, that you thought was strong, that would never get caught up, and a situation changes. And next thing you know, a couple of months later, they're in handcuffs. But what's your thoughts on that, Joe? If you were an inmate and you're observing, I mean, all three of those things matter, but, is there anyone that takes a priority, or is it more of, could be long-term, or it could be something even impulsive that changes the whole game?
And it could be either or. If it's something that you're trying to get done right then, you're looking at the impulse. So you're looking at the situation and environment. If it's long term, you're looking to make this officer cross the line and fall in love. That's going to take time in all three. In order to be manipulated, we're not even talking about love. It could be, I may want to get contraband passed from the chow hall and bring it back to my cell. My homeboy's got a bag of tobacco down there that I want to bring back, and I'm looking for the environment, and I'm looking to see how often people come down and do security checks. How often is the supervision visible? I'm looking at, the officer who's in charge of the duty post. Do they give a shit about doing their job, or they're just the ones that hold the seat down for 8 hours and don't do their searches or don't do whatever? That's the person I'm going to try to exploit in order for me to get my contraband. I could be pushing a mop bucket. Hey, boss, I need to go get a bucket of mop water so I can finish mopping this run. Yeah, whatever. Just go get it. They're not searching. They're not looking at the mop bucket. They're not looking at what's in the water. You know what I mean? And so, manipulation can have value in various ways, not just love, especially in a correctional setting. It could be me trying to get contraband from one place to another. Depending on the situation itself and depending on what your end game and goal is, if you're looking to flip this officer and find love, or flip this officer for whatever you need to flip them for, that's going to take time. That's going to take all three. It's going to be, the person, the place, and the time. Whereas, I'm for impulse control, or for, momentary exploits, for getting contraband, it may be just a situation, or it may just be the environment at the time.
Now, mind you, you're right, Joe. The situation is what we have the least control over. Therefore, we have to control how we react to it. And I think that's what the inmates look at when it comes to situational impulse, or whatever, manipulation based on impulsive situations that could happen that can cause an opportunity for the inmate to exploit. So with that said, I can't control every situation that's going to come my way inside a prison, but I can control how I react to it. And I have to be very aware of my reaction. When it comes to manipulation, guys, situational factors are key that we mostly ignore. When I tell people, hey, you think you can get manipulated? No, it can never happen to me. My next response is, can you control everything that comes your way? And of course not. And hopefully they don't say they can. And if you can't control everything that comes your way, then you still have to be wary. And it's good to be a little wary that you could be exploited. So I want people to realize that situational factors are pushed on you, and how you react matters, because the inmates are watching that. And again, that's a little bit more something that's out of your control, so you have to control your reaction towards it. Now, when it comes to environmental factors, I want to mention something. So it's easy to put the blame on the individual, as I mentioned earlier, right? Because it makes sense. They've been trained, hopefully. They understand policy and procedures. They understand the consequences of their actions. I get it. Now, granted, you can have inmates that, put themselves in a position of trust somehow with these individuals, whether it's long-term relationship development or whatever it is. But eventually the person does tend to build a trust towards the inmate, which I truly believe does happen a lot more than we'd like to admit, but it does happen. And now what happens here, the inmate is able to minimize the consequences because the inmate is able to build trust. So if I have an individual that solely does the right thing because they're concerned of external consequences, like losing their job, or getting arrested, whatever the case may be, if there's a trust between me and that inmate and I feel that they're not going to report me, well, guess what? That external incentive doesn't work for me, because at this point here, hey, I trust them. They're not going to turn me in. So I'm not going to lose my job. I'm not going to get arrested. So, well, maybe I could try to push this a little further. But the environmental factor to me is also important, as I mentioned, because that's where if I'm an inmate and I want to facilitate a game, believe it or not, inmates tend to be a little bit more impulsive. So the quicker the outcome, the better. If I could do it without developing a relationship long-term and get something right away, I'm probably going to go for that. Or maybe I could put the effort long-term, but I want to get something quick. I want to get a bang for my buck. So I think when I look at the environment and I see that there's just no reinforcement or no obstacles against what I'm trying to implement, then that to me is going to motivate me to start the next part of the game, which is now I need the individual. I need someone who's vulnerable in some way or form that I'm able to exploit based on that vulnerability. So it's not going to be a universal, like Joe said. It's not going to be I'm going to have this person fall in love with me because that's the same game I would employ with everyone. It's not. It's observing the individual, finding out where they're vulnerable, and then going ahead and filling that gap so nicely where the game is really crafted on that individual. But if we all notice, if I went ahead and I said, hey, guys, and do you think this makes sense? For the person that says, yeah, that individual, they messed up and, they should be held fully accountable, blah, blah, blah. The next question I would ask is, and they should. I just want to make sure, we put accountability where it goes. So we all agree that the person that got caught up definitely should be held accountable. And the person who did the game 100% should be held accountable. But do you believe that this game only happened because the environment allowed it? Do you believe that if ABC were in play, would that have stopped it? Well, of course. So if you know that the inmate is observing the environment and they only went with the game because the environment allowed it, then do we also hold ourselves accountable? What's your thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, and there's several departments within a correctional setting where the environment can facilitate something right off the bat. One of my favorite ones was food service. Usually we would have 2 to 3 food service officers in there, maybe 1 food service manager and two food service officers in there, watching the overall operations of the kitchen, watching the chow being cooked and all that stuff. And maybe for some reason that day it's just 1 food service manager because 2 officers called in. We know that food service manager is busy. They're tied up. They're trying to carry the load of 3. So given that, I know they're probably not going to do searches of everybody before they go back to the house. So I'm going to try to steal some food and bring it back to the house for me. Something momentary, something impulsive right then and there, that the environment could be conducive for, because you already know they're working short. You already know they're not going to do pat searches before you leave. So the environment can absolutely facilitate something impulsive. It may be, and like I said, it may be nothing long term. Like, I'm trying to get somebody to fall in love with me. I want something that's gonna be a gain for me. If I can come back with extra hamburger meat and sell it on the block for $40, $50, so they can make their tacos or burritos or whatever. I'm going to do something that's going to benefit me. And, as long as the environment's going to be conducive, I'm going to keep doing it.
So what? I love what you're saying, Joe. Would it be too extreme for me to say this? I believe if I had to prioritize these 3, if I was an inmate, and I'm looking at, trying to plan out how I want to work my game, the reason why I do put pressure on the situation is because I believe situations can change the dynamic real quick, both good or bad, at least from the inmate's perspective. So, someone I wouldn't pay attention to, now a situation happens, now I am, or someone I was paying attention to, all of a sudden situation changed, now I'm not. So I think because of how quick a situation can change at any moment and could present an opportunity that wasn't there before, or close off an opportunity that wasn't there before, I have to put the priority on situation, only because it has such an effect on the immediate dynamic of whatever the game that is trying to be employed. I'll be honest with you. If I'm doing the long-term game with Joe, and all of a sudden something happens in a situation with another officer that I feel I can get to this one quicker, I may brush off Joe and go to this other officer because I may feel that the situation now is going to help facilitate that. Or, as I said, I could be working on Joe the slow game, and all of a sudden, maybe through our interaction, Joe says something to me that says, oh, wait a second now. I could speed the game up a bit because now we're doing long term, but Joe maybe told me something that could help me facilitate the game, maybe a situation on the outside that exposed some level of vulnerability. So because of the situational dynamic and how it could shift so quickly, I have to assume that you got to be aware of that situation, that it truly does define if the game is going to be successful or not, or where that opportunity best lies. Now, the funny thing is, if someone asked me, where would I go to next? I know guys, the way we're going to say this, I don't know if a lot of people are going to agree with it, but I think Joe knows where I'm getting at. But if I was to say next, and remember, I always said, even in past shows, but we're just diving into the dialogue to try to revisit and try to create a new perspective. I think it's safe to go ahead and say, let's say back in the older videos, we want to put 100% on the individual. But that's such a way to alleviate accountability from our part of preventing stuff from happening, because that's our goal. And maybe I got too relaxed in that perspective at one point, thinking that, you know what, it's 100% on the individual, and that freed me from taking any accountability. But I'm actually going to have to maybe try a shift and see what people think on this one, just to put it out there. I do think the situation is the number one thing because of the power of a situation. But then I'm going to have to move to the environmental factor. And the reason why is, if I'm an inmate, before I even think about really diving deep into an individual, I have to see if the environment is going to allow for this game to go on without any counter influence. I'm going to have to see if I'm able to do this game unobstructed. That's the key, because if there's too many obstacles in my way, I'm just not going to make the effort. It's not worth the effort. So you could have a soft staff member surrounded by a strong team, and that strong team will protect that soft staff member 100%. And I've seen it. And then that relationship with that soft team member and the rest of the team will start elevating the softer team member. But the environment is what allows the game to be played. So the second thing is, even if I had an impulsive situation, the inmate's going to look at that environment to see if there's any obstacles before they go ahead and jump into what they got to jump into, which leads to the next question. When someone gets caught up, do we automatically say when they're leaving, man, they deserve what happened, whatever it is, they messed up, they were too soft for this position, blah, blah, blah? Or are there any that may look back and say, shit, I know that person. They're not a bad person. Could I have done more? And that would be like the Vicky White story. What's your thoughts on that, Joe?
Yeah, there are going to be times where it's solely on the individual themselves. They knew, they should have known better, but they did it anyway. Versus, say, we recognize that maybe this soft individual is soft. We recognize it from the outside, maybe from across department, maybe a security officer, a frontline supervision looking at, say, food service. We know that they're not doing pat searches. So, we in turn bring a couple officers and pat search their inmates for them. We find contraband that they're trying to smuggle out of the kitchen. That's kind of an attention getter, a wake up call for that soft target. Say, hey, you need to start doing your job. But in the case of, somebody falling in love with an inmate, bringing in contraband, bringing in drugs, a lot of that, I would say 80% of that's going to fall for me, looking on the outside as an investigator, 80% of that for me is going to fall on the individual themselves. They knew, they should have known better, but they did it anyway. They took the chance. They took that moment of chance, for vulnerability, for greed, whatever. And then the other 20% is, how did our environment allow this to happen? What are we doing? What are we not doing that allowed this to happen? So every situation is going to have an individual It's going to have a moment of chance. It's going to have maybe something negative that's happened in the environment that, we should be doing, but we're not because we're short staffed, whatever the case is. But every ending is going to have, a person that's getting blamed, and sometimes multiple. It's going to have, what are we not doing in the environment that facilitated this? And, what was happening at that time that allowed this to happen? So, it's easy for us to armchair quarterback and say, you know what, that dirty bastard, he was dirty from the get-go. It may not be the case.
Right.
It may be that, the environment, the lax environment or the lack of security presence, there could be a lot of things that allow that to happen. Now, should the person have done it? No, absolutely not. They probably should have known better. Or, in some cases that, if drugs are being brought in under the person's nose, if they're being muled through the kitchen, through education, through whatever, and the officer doesn't know about it, you can't really blame the officer 100% because, they didn't know. But at the same time, there are external factors for the situation and the environment that we look at. Were they supposed to be pat searching? What are their actual job duties that, were they doing their job duties and this happened anyway? There's a lot of things that could take place in these environments and situations in a correctional setting that we can blame, one of the three, two of the three, or all three.
Yeah. And what's funny, what you just said, if you have an environment that's complacent, especially complacent for inmate interactions, it's like the speed limit. I'll only go a little over until that becomes the norm. Then I'll go a little more over. So if I'm one that's looking to go ahead and an inmate's looking, let's say if an inmate's looking to develop me into a source or whatever, a resource for them, manipulate me. Well, if the interactions around me aren't as stern as they should be and don't really have those defined lines, then I get a little blurred. I'm going to look at my environment and I saw the way Joe talked to me. Maybe doing this route isn't that far from what Joe's doing, and I want to mention something too, because you mentioned complacency matters. A complacent culture is usually what allows for these games to exist. And I want to say something. If I asked a person and said, hey, would you trust an inmate? And 90, I would like to say 100%, but 99% should say no. And that's when you turn around and say, well, it's funny because your complacent work effort shows me that you do. And I don't mean to be an ass, but it's true. You get some people say that, we're trained not to trust inmates, and it's really made me really paranoid about interactions. Really, I said that's unique because your work ethic shows you something totally different. If you were so paranoid, then why are you not doing your job effectively?
Yeah.
There is a complacent culture that allows for trust not to be outward said, but it's there because if you're not doing your job, I would like to think that's because you trust that the inmates aren't doing anything that's worthy of you making the extra effort. So when it comes to manipulation, again, and it comes to that environmental factor, the reason why I'm pushing this, and I don't know if many people would agree with it, is if I'm management and I'm looking back and I'm saying, well, how did this happen? As management, I have to look at the environment that allowed it. I do. That's part of the long-term plan, because even if I fire the individual who got caught up, I have to look at the circumstances that led to this developed relationship. And I'm saying develop because when I say develop, I'm equating it to an amount of time that had to pass for this to be successful enough to where the person was willing to sacrifice whatever that consequence was for that inmate. And it doesn't always have to be a love, as I mentioned, but there is some level of developed trust. Because if I'm going to break the rule, there's got to be some trust that you're not going to report me. So we need to create obstacles. We need to be in the middle to make sure that, hey, even if you were doing it, don't do it around me. And we should all have a culture that says that. That means that every interaction should be, hey, if you're doing it, then don't do it around me. Like, because sometimes it's like, well, Ganji, sometimes I feel it, but I just don't know. Okay, well, you should still say something, because at the end of the day, even if you say something, that person's going to say, well, you know what? Let's not do it around Joe. Let's not do it around Ganji, because Ganji came up today. He was kind of nice about it. He wasn't, he didn't know if we weren't, but I don't want to do it in front of him no more, because the fact that he knows, or could, I think he's looking at me a little bit differently. So sometimes just you going up to the person could create an obstacle. And now if everybody did that and did what they were supposed to do, next thing you know, there'd be no one that they'd be willing to do in front of. But I think the environmental factor does play a part. And then again, as management, I'm going to want to know long-term solutions that are based on, hey, do we have a culture that's just lax? I mean, how do I have this relationship? I've heard, like, I would be stunned if you get someone that gets caught up, they do the investigation, and they find out that, wow, did you know that this officer and this inmate have been together for years? How embarrassing is that? Now, I'm going to be honest with you. If someone had told me, hey, if Joe got caught up with an inmate, and then we're doing all this research and trying to figure out what the fuck happened, what was Joe thinking, and you're hoping it was something situational. You're hoping it was something quick. And then later on, as you're doing your research, you start to find out that Joe and this inmate were involved in a relationship for years. You know how embarrassing that is, to know that this has been going on for years under our own noses, under people that are working next to these individuals. And then how do you say, well, I didn't know anything about it? Really? Or you didn't want to know anything about it? Because when that person got caught up, nobody was shocked. Nobody was shocked. They all said, well, we knew that was going to happen. Really? Really? And it's such an embarrassment for the agency, because I think that it shows that the stuff that we're in control of, right under our noses, we have no idea what the hell's happening. When you have a developed relationship that goes on for years, and that leads to whatever it is, an escape or contraband, whatever it is, and then to say that, holy, this has been going on for years, they've been dating for years, they've been talking on the phone for years, and we didn't know nothing about it, that's a shame on so many levels. Because, man, if you don't know what the hell's happening in your own facility, in the own house you manage, and the own house that you're a part of, then what the hell are you there for? Joe, would you think that would be embarrassing if you were doing an investigation for some undue relationship that led to something criminal, like an escape or whatnot, and someone comes back and you go ahead and surprise the warden, hey, by the way, did you know that these two have been involved together for years? How does that look?
Yeah, it's absolutely embarrassing, and I've seen investigations come out that way. And, unfortunately, a lot of people would like to claim ignorance is bliss, or, the fact that, it's not my problem, I'm going to stay in my lane, type of behavior. And then, when it comes out, nobody's shocked except for you. The one that's doing the investigation, and it's embarrassing and it's insulting at the same time, because, this has been going on for such a long period that, and you ask yourself, how the fuck did I not see this?
Mm-hmm.
How did I not know? But yet, when word gets out, they're like, yeah, I'm not surprised. I seen that coming a long time ago. What the fuck do you mean? You seen that coming a long time ago? You knew about it, you didn't say nothing. I've seen it happen too many times, and it's absolutely embarrassing, because it's almost, when it comes to light, and God forbid it reaches the media, it's almost like we facilitated this. We allowed it to happen. We said, okay, we know about it and it's okay. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely embarrassing.
And Joe, sometimes when they have the person that makes the bad decision, gets caught up, does something foolish, and they make an example out of the person, I wonder, now that we're watching this, maybe it's not so much making the example about that one person, but now going back and looking at everyone, because I think it only happened because somewhere along the line we had to allow it to happen. So who here right now would be willing to admit that you knew something even if it was just something small and you chose to ignore it because you thought it would be uncomfortable to address it. Fair enough. It's a great question to ask.
Yeah.
You know, you may have felt something, and now watch how people don't want to quickly say, oh, I knew something was up. Oh, yeah, that's great for the locker room talk. Joe gets caught up. He's in handcuffs. I knew something was going on, and they'll vent all day in the locker room about that. Yeah, you know, and they'll start talking about incidences that the way they were at the podium together and they were off center, or they were on the, you know, they weren't in front, they were on the side, or always chatting with that individual, or, you know, every time she was in the office, Joe had his feet up and they were complacent. And then you're sitting there thinking, man, that's a lot of signs that you also ignored.
Yeah.
And that's somewhere along the line. Here's the worst thing of it all. Here's the worst thing of it all. You ignore it. You accepted it. And then somehow later on, when it all gets put to the surface, you sit there and you go back and rehash what you've accepted. And then now if someone was just to change that question and say, hey, I hear all this banter in the locker room, so now I'm going to ask you right now, did anybody have an inkling of this and did not do anything to stop it? Because I want to know now, because that is also going to be looked at. Locker room stops talking, everybody backs out, and they avoid the accountability. And I know some people will look at it and say, well, Ganji, you know, I'm tired of pushing percentages. I'm tired of saying that, you know, it's 100% this individual, it's 100% that individual. You can't, because somewhere along the line never balances out. Like I can't say, well, you know, as I'm thinking of this dialogue, 50% this person, 30% this person, which only gives me 20%. No, you know what? Screw it. 100% here, 100% here, 100% over here, 100% up there. At this point here, when you have that type of culture that allows for that game to happen, I'm not going to divvy up percentages. I'm sorry. Hey, you got caught up messing with that inmate, 100% accountability. Hey, you, the inmate, you manipulate this individual, 100% accountability. Hey, the environment that allowed it to happen, that knew, but they didn't do nothing about it, and they've admitted that they knew and did, 100% accountability. You know, it's like, you know, 60, 30. Nah, you know what? At this point here, if we want to step up the game, if we want to show people how serious of a matter it is, you can't defer to accountability when they get caught. Like you can't just sit there and, you know, oh, that would never happen to me. Okay, but also what never happened was you stopping it. Yeah. You know, so I mean, it is a tough topic, because I think a lot of people will look at the person that did what they shouldn't have done and be able to, you know what? So they're gonna twist the argument. So you're gonna blame me because I didn't stop it, and what about what they did? Oh, they're getting blamed too, 100%. I didn't go ahead and lessen the blame and put it on you. I'm just gonna hold everyone equally accountable, because at this point here, I think we should be. It's if you have manipulation at play, God forbid they bring in a contraband that hurts somebody. Because I'll guarantee you, if it did end in a result where they brought in something that winds up taking out another officer, that locker room banter of, oh, I knew that was going to happen. You wouldn't be talking about that anymore. Everybody would be hush hush. But deep down inside, like Joe mentioned, we know this profession, and we know when there's a dynamic shift. We feel it. We just refuse to acknowledge it, because we know if we have to acknowledge it, we have to embrace whatever conflict that's going to lead towards. And to be honest with you, part of our job is conflict. So if you're not willing to embrace the conflict to make the environment safer, then what the hell are you in this position for?
Yeah.
You know, what's your thoughts on that, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen situations where 5 people got fired over one person's actions. And, you know, it wasn't about the one person who got fired anymore. It's man, that's jacked up. The other 5 people got fired behind that. Well, you know, to me, you know, deliberate indifference, you know, it's not just about the inmate. The deliberate indifference to me is about accountability, self-accountability, accountability for others, helping your teammates. If you see somebody doing something that could affect the institutional operations, could facilitate an escape, or turn into a love triangle of some sort, you know, you have a duty to report that. You know, you can't come at the ass end of this thing and say, well, yeah, I seen it coming. What do you mean you seen it coming? You knew about it and you didn't report it. So to me, you're just as culpable as the person who committed the act because you knew about it and didn't report it, especially something that's been going on for a length of time. It pisses me off when I do an investigation. I find out that people knew things all along, but didn't report it because they didn't want to be the snitch. They didn't want to be singled out. They didn't want to be pushed away. And to me, I can understand to a degree, but there are telltale signs of things going on. And if it's going to lead down a rabbit hole for this officer, you have a duty to report them, not only because they may be dirty, but maybe because they're being manipulated or they're emotionally vulnerable. We also have a duty to try to help that officer and save them from themselves before they get to that point. And I think that's probably what frustrates me the most when it comes to these manipulation things is the fact that somebody's seen it coming. We had an opportunity to save this officer from themselves or this employee from themselves and kind of focus them in another direction and make them, better themselves, not allow it to happen again. But to me, when people know about it and don't say nothing about it, to me, they're just as culpable. And there's been times where, I've held other people accountable for it because, they don't want to be the snitch. They don't want to be the, okay, one for in particular, officer brought in a Subway sandwich, ate half of it and gave the other half to an inmate. And, their justification for not reporting it was, well, it was just a sandwich. What if that sandwich had a 32 gun in it?
Yep.
What if that sandwich had a shank in it? A sandwich just isn't a sandwich in a correctional facility. Everything is an opportunity for contraband, for dangerous weapons, dangerous drugs to come in. And that's what we're trying to prevent. We're also trying to prevent the introduction of contraband. So, to me, knowing about it and not saying nothing about it, or God forbid, they brought this sandwich in and it had K2 and fentanyl in it, and the inmate dies because of it. Now it's not the fact that you knew about it and didn't report it. You knew about it, didn't report it, and the inmate died as a result of it. So now you could be criminally responsible. And it's stupid that the fact that these people don't want to report things like this, that could turn into a deadly situation for either staff members or for the inmate population. So to me, I mean, you're equally should be held accountable if you knew and did not act.
Yeah, and you know what, guys? One last thing. Remember something. There's human interaction. So, yes, we know what the defined role is, and we have that layer of protection. But you also have to realize that's going to be going against the daily attempts of an inmate to try to erode that first layer. And that's where we come in together as a team and make sure that we keep that layer strong. That's where the balance is, because you got to assume through every interaction, through every attempt to communicate, let's say, with an inmate, you could have a chance where the inmate's going to try to manipulate a game and get rid of that layer, that first layer where your prescribed role is, to build a rapport. And that's where we all have to come in and make sure that layer is reinforced, not just with ourselves, but with each other. You have to allow that there are going to be human interactions here, and we have to make sure that we balance that with professionalism. And I tell people at the end of the day, I know this sounds crazy, but the reason why we all have to help each other is because every day, and this may never have been said on this channel before, but I truly believe this. Every day when you're working in corrections, and take this within the context of everything I just said, you are doing your best to suppress whatever it is, that emotion that's going to connect you to that inmate beyond what your prescribed role is, because we all have it in us. We all want to connect. We all want to belong. So at the end of the day, you have to fight that. And for some, it's easier than others. But it's something that has to be done every day. And our job is to make sure that we partner well with our team and make sure that we're with them in this battle. because once in a while they may not realize that they're throwing up a flag and the inmate sees the flag. Well, where were you though? How come you didn't stop that flag from going up? So I think that what we need to do more of is to understand how this dynamic works and to be there to reinforce the staff that may need our help. Again, if a staff member is vulnerable, it doesn't mean that they can't be in this job. It just means that, we may have to be with them a little bit more, because I would like to think that we all could be vulnerable at some level. And if not today, tomorrow. You don't know. And then if that's the case, we have to be there for each other, because God forbid you do have a staff member that has a moment of vulnerability, maybe the loss of a loved one or something. They feel lost in that moment. And unfortunately, they go to work. They don't take enough time in between the moment and work. And that vulnerability gets exposed. Now, all of a sudden, you have a human issue. Maybe the person lost somebody. They were vulnerable. They fell into a trap. An officer that was good, but they got caught into a situation that was extremely powerful, and they wind up falling victim to an inmate's game because the inmate was aware of whatever that vulnerability is, because the person wasn't in their right mindset. A person, this would stun most people, but it's like, well, where were we to help that person through it? Where he had a weak moment. Well, he must have been a fool. No, he could have been human. I think that's another thing. There are people that make foolish choices. And I think the foolish choices are choices that aren't as developed with the game. Just you come in and I'm going to go screw an inmate. Foolish. You come in, I'm going to go make money by selling contraband right off the bat. Foolish. But then there's people that have good intent that get into the system and wind up getting caught up. Not because they wanted to, but somewhere along the line through the process, they became lost. And now the problem is they didn't make a bad choice. In their mind, they made a human choice. And we weren't there to prevent that from happening. Am I softening that perspective? Maybe. But the reason why I'm doing that is to let you know that our involvement is needed more than ever. Because if I define that choice as a foolish choice, then you could remove yourself from the accountability and lay out the fact that that person was just foolish. But what if I told you that in some cases, in their mind, the choice isn't a foolish choice, it's a human choice, which we have to be aware of because it's part of who we are. Now, if that's the case, and that's a battle that we're fighting, where were you? How come you weren't alongside of me? Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why it's called a team, because we're supposed to look out for each other. I've had officers come to me and say, "Hey, Lou, that new officer that just got on shift, I seen her talking to this inmate. Apparently they're from the same area. They're talking about old times and old places and stuff like that. And I pulled her aside and kind of got in her ass about it, and because I don't want her to fall prey." I've had that happen too, and I'm good with that. It's not only the supervision that needs to be looking out for the people, but the frontline staff need to be looking out for each other. It doesn't take much for an inmate to find some sort of emotional commonality to get their foot in the door. It could be a person, it could be a place, it could be a thing. It could be sports. It could be, it's a whole multitude of things it can be. But, the biggest thing is that somebody recognizes it, deters it, and refocuses that person. It's not, just frontline staff or, frontline supervision. If one of my coworkers sees me doing something and they pull me aside and say, "Hey, man, you need to watch that dude. That dude is a lying son of a bitch. He is a manipulator. He will, it could be just as simple as that to stop a situation, to keep somebody from going down a rabbit hole, and I wholeheartedly believe that supervision can deter it by walking around, by hitting these duty posts, by looking at the areas, by being observant of what the staff are doing. You can kind of tell the culture of your shift if you're out and you're present and you're visible. If you're in the office, it's super easy to claim ignorance is bliss because you never get out of the damn office. Even for my sergeants, I held them accountable. I made them go walk these areas because the one thing I hated to hear was, hey, did you know this was going on? Well, no, I'm, in here doing paperwork. Okay, well, the paperwork can wait. You need to be out there. You need to be visible. You need to see them people need to see you for, not just, because you're their supervisor, but because the inmate population needs to know that you're visible, and they're not going to have time to enact these plans.
Right.
That's why, everybody's role plays a bigger portion than just what their role is. Me being visible could stop that inmate from trying to manipulate an officer into bringing contraband in. My presence could stop that inmate from passing contraband off to another inmate. My presence can stop this employee from going down a rabbit hole if you're spending time with your employees and know your employees. That's the biggest thing. There's going to be telltale signs that something is going down, because all of a sudden, one officer who used to be in this group with other officers is suddenly by themselves and sitting to the side, not sitting with the people in shift mount anymore. That's your first telltale sign that something's going on. And if I can see that, the offender population can damn sure see it. So it's imperative that you know your people. It's imperative that you know your coworkers, know when they're having an off moment. It doesn't just happen to the new boots. It happens to the old hands too. I've seen it. I've had the one to walk these people out of the gate with 20 years of service because they had a moment of weakness that nobody interacted with them on. So, it's imperative that, we stay aware. We stay with the team mentality. We look out for each other. We're not there to snitch each other off. We're there to hold each other accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we should be doing. Because my goal, my main goal, I don't want to fire you. My goal is, you went through all this trouble to get this job. My whole purpose is to keep you there by any means necessary. And if that means that I have to give you a disciplinary for doing something wrong in order to get your attention and keep you from doing something wrong, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. But we should be holding each other accountable. Absolutely, 100% holding each other accountable.
It's funny. Sometimes people are willing to take responsibility of each other because maybe that's duty or defined by their duty, but accountability is taking onus of an outcome that maybe you didn't produce. But maybe we need that level of onus so we can prevent. It would motivate us to move forward and stop it from happening. Take more accountability over it, as we do have control of that outcome to some extent. But I want to mention one more thing before we come into closing. Sometimes, guys, if there's no counter influence, manipulation could become a routine where the person just gets used to it. Remember, it's slow and subtle. It's not extreme or drastic. So it's introduced in a slow and subtle way that the person accepts it. And it's not a real major shift for them, at least at that moment. It's small. Now, granted, over time, it's huge. It's a leap, but not at the moment. So sometimes if someone could just come in before it gets accepted as a routine and just kind of wake that person up a little bit and say, hey, I don't know what you're doing right now, but you're starting to go downhill. And by the way, look what I just said. I said you're starting to go downhill. I didn't say you're already downhill. I said you're starting to go downhill.
Yeah.
This gives me a chance to turn the person around before they start justifying why they're already downhill. I mean, I'll tell you something. It's easy for me to talk to somebody before they made the bad choices, as opposed to me trying to talk to them after they've already made the bad choices. And now my question of curiosity becomes a question of judgment. And now they're arguing against me because if I'm right, look at all the shit that they got to be held accountable for. So it's good to catch it beforehand when we recognize it. And we do recognize it. We do. You can tell when there's a shift in someone's dynamic. You could tell. I truly believe so. I think that, people enough to know, that, hey, this person's acting a little funny today, or hey, you know what? This person's been with this inmate a little bit too much. Okay, so you told me in the locker. Have you told them? Well, what do you mean? Well, you noticed it. Why are you telling me? You should be telling them. What do you want me to join in on a gossip pool and then we do something worse? We wind up separating them from any help? Because that's another foolish thing. I'd rather talk about Joe than do something. And now we got all this group that doesn't even want to talk to Joe anymore because of the negative gossip. And we pretty much just fed Joe to the wolves. All because I didn't have the courage to confront Joe when I saw it. I'd rather just gossip about Joe in the bathroom. I believe that happens a lot too. Hey, Joe, anything you'd like to say in closing? Do you agree with that last part before you get your closing statement in?
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. I've seen both dynamics where they prefer to talk about it versus acting on it, and I've seen the other side where I've seen people actually act on it, and as long as it's coworker to coworker and they're doing the right thing and mentoring this person, I'll kind of sit in the background and kind of let it happen. Because I applaud it and I appreciate it. I really do. When somebody has the balls to step in and say, hey, you know what, you're fucking up. You're letting yourself be vulnerable. You're getting over familiar. You're letting this inmate get over familiar. You need to knock that shit off before you get your ass in a wreck. I applaud that 100%. I love to see peer pressure come from coworkers. I really do. Because it's the fact that, they're holding each other accountable, without me having to get involved, because once supervision gets involved, the whole dynamic changes. It becomes a formal investigation at that point, versus your coworkers getting in, or, hey, I understand you're going through a divorce, but your work's slacking. You got to pick it up, man. You got to step it up, do your job, leave that other shit alone, let it go, and do your job, man. You're screwing up. I love to see that. I love to see it.
Hey, Joe, that is that your anything you like to say in closing at all, or
well, I mean, it just, where the subject was manipulation, that people need to know and understand that, it's a correctional setting. It's not a car dealership. Car dealerships are only open for 8 hours. Prison facilities are open 24/7, 365 days a year. And that's how much time that these inmates have to think about how they're going to target you, how they're going to play you, how they're going to get what they want, how to plan their actions, and our job is the same. Our job is to think about that 24/7, 365 days a year. I always said in the during pre-service academy is that every time an inmate's mouth's open, he's lying. And that's the way you should look at it. He's either lying or he's trying to play you to get something he wants. And, that's the way we need to treat it. To me, there shouldn't be any trust factor between a staff member and an inmate. There shouldn't be any room for them to get their foot in the door in an employee's life. We just need to understand and be cognizant and aware that the fact that, these guys have nothing but time to figure out how to play us to get what they want. And in turn, we need to think about, what games they're going to play with us so we can combat that. And just understand that, if you see somebody who is new on the job and they're making a mistake, regarding manipulation, say something about it. You don't have to say it to the supervisor right off the bat. Start with that employee, pull them aside, make them aware, make them understand. I love to see frontline peer pressure accountability. I absolutely love it because I know that I can trust my team to do the right thing. I know that my team has integrity. I know that my team cares enough even for the new person to come in because they're part of that team and they want to help them versus hurt them. By the time I get involved, it's pretty much a done deal. And, you know, during the course of the investigation, if I find out that other people knew and didn't say nothing, you know, I'm going to hold them just as accountable as I'm going to hold the person who made the mistake accountable and the inmate accountable. You know, we need to make sure that we're looking out for each other. And, you know, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Frontline supervisors need to get off your ass, get out of that office and walk your facilities. Be in your people's lives, not just because you're trying to thwart something from happening, but because you truly care about your staff. You want them to know that you're there for them. You want them to know that they should have enough trust in you that they can come to you with an issue. Make yourself visible, make yourself seen, know your people, and be invested in them.
You know, my closing thoughts are just would share something with you, a little bit of a story. It will be quick. So when you have someone that's caught up in an undue relationship and it finally gets exposed because whatever the outcome is, whatever they decided to do, and you start to hold the person accountable, the first thing you have to do as management or anybody that's looking to write the charge and take the next step is you have to prove that you've given the person some level of training. So that they're aware that what they've done was wrong. And I know looking back at it when I was doing it, it's like, oh, this is bullshit. You know, they know what they did was wrong and there's this assumption. And it's kind of built, you're upset. You know, this person, you know, broke the rules. They're no longer one of us. So you're filled with this anger, this emotion. And even as you're looking for the training, it's like, this is a bunch of bullshit. You know, they know what they did was wrong. This is bullshit. I have to show them that they were trained on this and all this other stuff. But there's also another thing that comes with that too, which is there's also a level of accountability when I'm looking for that training. So even though I'm approaching it in a very angry way because you're pissed that the person did what they did, you also are looking for these things because you have to be able to alleviate the accountability. And what I mean by that is I know there's times where there is an employee that, let's say, gets caught up. And now that I've been in the business a little bit longer, over 22 years, and I deal with a lot of the people, and then there are some where I'm shocked that they get caught up. And then there's just some, you know, they're just lucky. You just can't catch them. But for those that truly shock you, especially if you've invested time with them, you wind up getting disappointed. You're not even angry with them. You're just disappointed because, you know, I worked with you. I thought I was setting you on the right path, and you still went up and went out into that prison and did these foolish things. So the first question I will ask myself is, could I have done anything more? And that makes me look at the situation a bit different because I'm putting some level of accountability in my hands. Now, granted, I just want to make sure there's one more thing. I take enough accountability for me to first look at what I could have done. But then the next, even though I may ask the first question is, could I have done more? The answer to that question is truly going to make it where now that my accountability is being looked at, when I ask this second, or when I make the second statement of I've done enough, that's when I'm still able to take part of my accountability, but not to the point that I'm taking blame for their actions. So somewhere along the line, you have to ask yourself, yes, could I have done more? I get it. But ultimately what you're asking or what you're saying is, did I do enough? And sometimes that doing enough is literally when you know something's happened, when you feel it, is confronting the individual. And there's a lot of people that don't want to ask that question because deep down inside, they know that they didn't do enough. It took a while to get to that thought, but I knew I was getting it. As always, guys, the show is TFW. Please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.